February 15, 1942. Burhill Golf Club, Walton-on-Thames, England. The leather ball skips once, twice, 3 times across the still surface of the water hazard before plunging beneath with an anticlimactic plop. Barnes Wallis stands at the edge of the green, a 54-year-old man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles, watching the ripples expand outward in perfect concentric circles. His playing partner calls out something about taking a penalty stroke, but Wallis doesn't hear him. His mind is elsewhere, calculating trajectories and velocities, seeing not a golf ball but something far larger, far more destructive. He's been thinking about dams. For months now, the problem has consumed him like a slow-burning fever. Every night at his home in Effingham, he fills notebooks with equations and sketches. Every day at the Vickers Armstrong Works in Weybridge, where he serves as assistant chief designer, he sneaks moments between his official duties designing the Wellington bomber to pursue his obsession. His wife Molly has grown accustomed to finding him at 2 a.m., hunched over the dining room table, surrounded by crumpled papers and cold tea. The dams of the Ruhr Valley in western Germany are not just dams. They are the industrial arteries of the Third Reich. The Möhne Dam, completed in 1913, holds back 140 million cubic meters of water. The Edersee Dam, even larger, contains 200 million cubic meters. Together with smaller dams like the Sorp, they provide hydroelectric power and fresh water to the foundries, steel mills, coal mines, and factories that produce nearly 70% of Germany's steel and over half its coal. These structures make possible the tanks, the aircraft, the munitions that feed Hitler's war machine. Destroy the dams, military planners have reasoned since 1937, and you paralyze Nazi industry for months, perhaps even years. The flooding alone would be catastrophic, drowning factories, washing away bridges, contaminating water supplies, disrupting transportation networks. It would be, potentially, one of the most devastating single strikes of the entire war. There's just one problem: it's impossible. Wallis knows this because he's studied every possible approach. Conventional bombing from altitude? The dams are too thick. The Möhne's wall is 40 meters thick at its base, built from cyclopean masonry that could shrug off any bomb then in existence. The RAF's standard 500-pound general-purpose bomb, dropped from 15,000 feet, would bounce off the stone like a tennis ball. Even the massive 4,000-pound cookies barely scratch hardened concrete. What about a direct assault? Impossible. The dams are defended by anti-aircraft batteries, searchlights, and squadrons of night fighters. Any formation attempting a low-level attack in daylight would be shredded long before reaching the target. Torpedoes, then? No. The Germans have anticipated this, stretching heavy torpedo nets across the water upstream from each dam. And even if a torpedo could somehow penetrate these defenses, it would likely explode against the dam's sloped upstream face, where the water pressure would actually help the structure absorb the blast. The only way to destroy a gravity dam, and Wallis knows this from his engineering training, is to explode a charge directly against the underwater foundation, where the water pressure would magnify the blast and propagate cracks upward through the masonry. The explosion must occur at depth, ideally 30 to 40 feet below the surface, pressed right against the dam wall. But how do you get a bomb to that precise location? The problem has defeated every engineer and tactician who's examined it. It's a puzzle with no solution, a Gordian knot that cannot be untied. Wallis watches his golf ball sink and thinks, what if we don't drop the bomb? What if we skip it? The concept isn't entirely original. Every schoolboy has skipped stones across a pond. Nelson's cannons at Trafalgar sometimes bounced cannonballs across the waves to strike enemy ships at the waterline. The principle is ancient, almost intuitive. A projectile striking water at a shallow angle with sufficient velocity will ricochet, conserving much of its energy for the next impact. But a bomb is not a stone. A bomb weighs thousands of pounds and must travel hundreds of yards while maintaining enough velocity to strike the dam wall with force. And then here's the truly devilish part: it must sink beside the wall and detonate at precisely the right depth. Over the following weeks, Wallis attacks the problem with the methodical precision that has defined his career. Born in 1887 in Derbyshire, he'd started his engineering life at the age of 16 as an apprentice at the Thames Engineering Works. Through night school and sheer determination, he'd educated himself in mathematics, physics, and structural engineering. By the time of the Great War, he was designing airships for Vickers. In the 1920s and 30s, he pioneered the geodetic airframe design, a revolutionary lattice structure that gave aircraft incredible strength at minimal weight. His Wellington bomber, with its geodetic fuselage, could absorb tremendous battle damage and still bring crews home. By 1942, more than 11,000 Wellingtons were in service. Now he turns that same innovative mind to an even more complex challenge. The mathematics are brutally difficult. The bomb must strike the water at exactly the right angle. Too steep and it will plunge beneath the surface, too shallow and it will skip over the dam entirely. It must have sufficient mass to carry destructive force, but not so much that it sinks immediately on first contact. It must be released at a precise altitude, at a precise airspeed, at a precise distance from the target. Wallis begins with first principles. He calculates impact angles, ricochet trajectories, energy dissipation rates. He fills notebook after notebook with differential equations. At night, he lies awake visualizing the bomb's path, aircraft approaching low across the water, bomb release, initial impact creating a geyser of white spray, the bomb leaping forward like a porpoise, striking again, bouncing closer, until finally kissing the dam wall and sliding down into the dark water. But there's another problem, one that reveals itself in his calculations. A conventional cylindrical bomb, dropped nose first, would tumble chaotically upon striking water. Each bounce would send it careening off at random angles. The solution, Wallis realizes, is to give the bomb rotation. What if the bomb was spinning backward, rotating about its horizontal axis like a wheel before it struck the water? The backspin would create Magnus effect, the same aerodynamic principle that makes a curveball curve. Upon impact, the spinning bomb would grip the water surface and leap forward predictably. Each bounce would follow a calculated trajectory. The spin would stabilize the bomb's flight path like rifling stabilizes a bullet. It's ingenious. It's unprecedented. And Wallis has no idea if it will actually work. He needs to test the concept, but he cannot do so through official channels. The Air Ministry is already skeptical of his ideas. In April 1941, he'd submitted a paper titled A Note on a Method of Attacking the Axis Powers, that outlined a strategic bombing campaign against German infrastructure, including dams. The response had been polite but dismissive. Air Marshal Portal had written, "We should be in a much stronger position to consider and approve such projects if the Wellington bomber were not still suffering from various teething troubles." The message was clear: stick to your day job. So Wallis operates in secret. He uses his own money, his family's money, to build models and conduct preliminary tests. In his back garden in Effingham, his daughter Mary watches as her father fills a washtub and drops marble-sized spheres into it, trying different heights, different spins. The neighbors must think him mad. By spring 1942, he's ready for a larger test. Using a hand-cranked catapult of his own design, he travels to Silvermere Lake near Cobham, about 5 miles from his home. The area is quiet, secluded. On a cool morning in late April, with mist still hanging over the water, Wallis stands beside a crude testing apparatus, essentially a large slingshot mounted on a timber frame. His bomb is a 2-inch wooden sphere with a lead core, painted white for visibility. He's carefully calculated the scale. If this test succeeds, the principles should apply to a full-sized weapon weighing 9,000 pounds or more. The first attempts are failures. The sphere plunges straight into the water without bouncing. He adjusts the angle, tries again. This time it skips once before sinking. He modifies the catapult's release mechanism, increasing the backspin. Another sphere. Another failure. Wallis is undeterred. He's spent his entire career solving problems that others deemed impossible. The geodetic airframe had been called fantasy before he built it. This will be no different. He adjusts, calculates, tries again. On the 15th attempt, something changes. The sphere strikes the water at a shallow angle, spinning rapidly backward. Instead of plunging beneath the surface, it grips the water and leaps forward, bounding across the lake like a stone in the hands of a champion skipper. 1 bounce. 2. 3. 4. 5 times it kisses the surface before finally exhausting its energy and sinking. Wallis watches, heart hammering in his chest, and sees in that tiny white sphere the death of the Ruhr dams. But seeing it and building it are different matters entirely. A 2-inch wooden sphere is not a 9,000-pound cylinder of steel and explosives. And even if he can design such a weapon, he must convince the hidebound bureaucrats of the Air Ministry that a 54-year-old aircraft designer has somehow solved a problem that has stymied the entire British military establishment. He needs data. Hard, irrefutable proof. And he needs allies in high places. Throughout the summer of 1942, Wallis conducts more tests, each larger than the last. He scales up to a 3-foot wooden model, weighing 50 pounds, testing it in a ship testing tank at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. The results are promising but incomplete. He needs access to actual military resources, wind tunnels, bombing ranges, official support. The breakthrough comes through an unlikely source, a senior civil servant named David Pye, who works at the Ministry of Aircraft Production. Pye had been impressed by Wallis's earlier paper on strategic bombing and had quietly followed the engineer's unauthorized research. In August 1942, Pye arranges for Wallis to meet with Vice Admiral Edward de Fay Renauf, the Controller of Research and Development at the Ministry of Supply. In a stuffy Whitehall office, Wallis presents his concept. He unrolls his diagrams, shows his calculations, describes the tests at Silvermere Lake. Renauf, a submariner by training, immediately grasps the revolutionary nature of the weapon. But he also understands the bureaucratic obstacles. "You'll need to convince Bomber Harris," Renauf says, referring to Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, head of RAF Bomber Command. Harris is a blunt, aggressive commander who has little patience for unconventional ideas, especially from civilians. He believes in overwhelming force, thousands of heavy bombers reducing German cities to rubble through area bombing. Harris had explicitly rejected earlier proposals to strike the dams, calling them panacea targets that distracted from his main campaign. Nevertheless, Renauf makes calls. Doors begin to open. In late 1942, Wallis receives permission to use the Nantwigro Dam in Wales a disused structure for full-scale testing. He's also granted access to proper explosives and detonators. On a cold December morning, Wallis stands near the dam as RAF officers watch from a safe distance. A Wellington bomber, one of his own designs, roars overhead at 150 feet. In its bomb bay hangs a cylindrical charge, not yet the final design, but close. The bomb drops, strikes the water, and bounces 3 times before slamming into the dam wall and detonating. The explosion sends up a column of water that drenches everyone present. When the spray clears, they see it, a crack, running vertically up the dam's face. It works. By January 1943, Wallis has refined his design. The weapon, designated Upkeep for security purposes, will be a cylinder 4 feet in diameter and 5 feet long, weighing 9,250 pounds when fully loaded with Torpex explosive. Before release, the bomb will be spun backward at 500 RPM by a hydraulic motor driven by the Lancaster bomber's engine. Upon release from exactly 60 feet altitude at exactly 220 miles per hour, the spinning cylinder will skip across the water surface, strike the dam wall, sink beside it to a depth of 30 feet, and detonate via a hydrostatic fuse. The tolerances are razor thin. Too high, and the bomb will shatter on impact. Too low, and the bomber will strike the water and disintegrate. Too fast or too slow, and the bomb will either overshoot or sink prematurely. The pilot must release at precisely 425 yards from the dam, a distance that can only be judged at night, over water, while flying at treetop height and evading enemy fire. It seems impossible. But Wallis has already achieved the impossible. Now he needs pilots crazy enough to try. In February 1943, Air Chief Marshal Portal finally approves the concept. Harris, overruled by his superiors, reluctantly agrees to provide aircraft and crews. The mission is given a code name, Operation Chastise. A new squadron will be formed specifically for this attack. It will need the RAF's best pilots, best navigators, best bomb aimers. It will need months of intensive training in low-level night flying, the most dangerous form of aviation. It will need specially modified Lancaster bombers with the bomb bays removed and the Upkeep weapon mounted between caliper arms that could spin the cylinder before release. It will need a leader, someone with combat experience, someone with unshakable nerve, someone willing to fly 50 feet above the ground at 220 miles per hour straight into the face of enemy guns. In March 1943, the Air Ministry selects Wing Commander Guy Gibson, 24 years old, veteran of 173 combat operations, holder of the Distinguished Service Order and Bar and Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar. Gibson is told he's being taken off operations to form a new squadron for special duties. He's told nothing about the target. Not yet. But in a locked workshop at Vickers, technicians are already building the first Upkeep weapons. In a hangar at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, ground crews are beginning to modify the first Lancaster bombers. And in his office in Weybridge, Barnes Wallis is making final calculations, checking and rechecking his figures, knowing that if his mathematics are off by even the smallest margin, the men who fly this mission will die for nothing. The countdown to Operation Chastise has begun. March 21, 1943. RAF Scampton, Lincolnshire, England. Wing Commander Guy Gibson walks across the windswept tarmac of RAF Scampton with the gait of a man who has looked death in the face too many times to fear it anymore. At 24, he has the weathered eyes of someone twice his age. 173 operations over Germany, over France, over the North Sea in every kind of weather. He's flown Hamdens, Beaufighters, and now Lancasters. He's seen aircraft beside him explode in mid-air, watched parachutes fail to open, pulled dying gunners from burning turrets. 3 weeks ago, he completed his third tour of duty. He was supposed to be done, rotated to a training post or desk job where the greatest danger would be paperwork and boredom. Instead, Group Captain John Whitworth, the station commander, summoned him yesterday with cryptic instructions. Form a new squadron, handpick the crews, prepare for a single operation of utmost importance. No details. No target. Just an authorization to recruit the best men in Bomber Command and train them for something no one had attempted before. Gibson stops at the threshold of Hangar 2 and stares at what should be a Lancaster bomber. The aircraft before him is recognizable: the same 4 Merlin engines, the same 102-foot wingspan, the same mid-upper and rear gun turrets. But the bomb bay doors have been removed entirely. Where bombs should hang, there's now a peculiar apparatus. 2 steel caliper arms forming a cradle, and mounted between them, a massive cylinder that looks like nothing so much as an enormous oil drum. What in God's name is that? Gibson mutters. A ground crew sergeant approaches, wiping his oil-blackened hands on a rag. Beats me, sir. They've been installing them all week. Heavy buggers. 2 took 8 of us to lift it into place. Some sort of mine, we figure. Gibson circles the aircraft slowly, studying the modification. The cylinder is mounted transversely across the aircraft's belly, its axis perpendicular to the fuselage. There's a belt-driven mechanism connected to a hydraulic motor clearly designed to spin the weapon before release. The whole assembly looks like something cobbled together by a mad inventor, which, Gibson will learn, is not far from the truth. When's the briefing? He asks. Tomorrow morning, sir. 9 o'clock hours. Group captain says you'll meet the boffin who designed this thing. The boffin. That would be Barnes Wallis, though Gibson doesn't know the name yet. He'll learn it tomorrow, and in the weeks to come, he'll develop a grudging respect for the obsessive engineer who has created both his aircraft, the Wellington, that carried him through his first tour, and this bizarre weapon that may well kill him on his last mission. But tonight, Gibson has other concerns. If he's to form a squadron in weeks rather than months, he needs crews. Not just any crews, the absolute best. He returns to the officers' mess and begins making telephone calls. March 23, 1943. The station commander's office, RAF Scampton. The room is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Gibson sits at a large table, facing Barnes Wallis across a spread of blueprints, photographs, and mathematical calculations that might as well be hieroglyphics for all the sense they make to him. Beside Wallis is Captain Joseph Mutt Summers, Vickers chief test pilot, and Group Captain Charles Whitworth. Wallis is explaining the weapon for the 3rd time, his voice patient but strained. He's not a natural public speaker. He stumbles over words, gets lost in technical details, assumes his audience understands principles they've never encountered. But Gibson is beginning to grasp the essential madness of the plan. So let me understand this correctly, Gibson interrupts, stubbing out his cigarette. You want us to fly at 60 feet, not 600 feet, but 60 feet at night, over water, at precisely 220 miles per hour, and release this spinning oil drum at exactly 425 yards from a dam wall that we can barely see, while Germans shoot at us with every gun they possess. In essence, yes, Wallis says quietly. And if we're 10 feet too high, the bomb shatters. Yes. And if we're 10 feet too low, we hit the water and explode. Most likely, yes. And if we're too fast or too slow, the bomb either overshoots the dam or sinks before reaching it. Correct. Gibson lights another cigarette, his hand steady despite the enormity of what he's hearing. And you've tested this? Wallis straightens, a hint of defensiveness entering his voice. Extensively. We've conducted trials at Reculver bombing range in Kent, dropping spherical test bombs at various heights and speeds. We've used Wellington bombers modified with special sights. The principle is sound. Spherical. Gibson catches the word. This thing isn't spherical. It's a bloody cylinder. We had to modify the design, Wallis admits. A sphere was easier to test, but a cylinder carries more explosive for its weight. The physics remain the same. The backspin creates the necessary Magnus effect for controlled bouncing. We've recently completed successful trials with the cylindrical version. Recently? How recently? Wallis hesitates. Last week. There's a long silence. Gibson exchanges glances with Whitworth, who gives an almost imperceptible shrug. This is insanity. But it's sanctioned insanity, approved at the highest levels. The operation has Churchill's blessing, Portal's backing. Whether it makes sense or not, it's happening. All right, Gibson says finally. Show me the targets. Wallis unfurls a large aerial reconnaissance photograph. Even in the grainy black and white image, the Möhne Dam is impressive, a massive curved wall stretching across a valley, holding back a vast reservoir. Wallis's finger traces the approach route. You'll come in from the east, flying up the reservoir at minimum altitude. The torpedo nets extend about 50 yards upstream from the dam. You must release before you reach them. The bomb will bounce, we calculate, 4 to 6 times depending on conditions, strike the dam wall, sink beside it, and detonate at 30 feet depth via hydrostatic fuse. And the defenses? Gibson asks. Whitworth slides another photograph across the table. This one shows gun emplacements on the dam's tower's multiple positions marked in intelligence annotations. Heavy flak. Probably 20mm cannons. Searchlights on both sides of the valley. And you can expect night fighters from nearby airfields once the alert goes up. Gibson studies the photograph with a bomber pilot's eye, calculating angles and approach vectors. The valley is narrow, flanked by hills. There's no room for evasive maneuvers. Once committed to the bombing run, they'll be flying straight and level, a perfect target. How many aircraft? He asks. 19 Lancasters, Whitworth says. 3 waves. 9 to hit the Möhne, 5 for the Eder Dam, 5 in reserve for the Sorp and other secondary targets. And crews. You're to recruit them personally. Pick anyone in Bomber Command. They'll be released to your squadron immediately. Gibson allows himself a thin smile. That's something, at least. If he's going to lead men into this meat grinder, he'll choose men he trusts. Men who can fly at treetop height in darkness, who won't panic when the searchlights find them, who can put a bomb on target while flak is tearing their aircraft apart. He already has names in mind. Over the next 2 weeks, Gibson assembles his squadron like a man building a precision instrument. He recruits pilots he's flown with, men whose skills he knows firsthand. Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood, 21 years old, who can hold an aircraft steady in the worst turbulence. Pilot Officer Les Knight, an Australian with nerves of steel. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby, Squadron Leader Henry Maudsley, Flight Lieutenant David Shannon, each one a veteran with dozens of operations under their belt. For navigators, he wants men who can plot courses accurate to the second, who can guide aircraft through the darkness using dead reckoning and the faintest landmarks. He recruits Flight Lieutenant Harold Hobday, Pilot Officer Jack Lego, Sergeant Frank Appleby. The bomb aimers are crucial. They'll be lying prone in the nose of the Lancaster, staring through the bomb sight while flak bursts around them, calling corrections to the pilot. Left, left, steady, steady. Gibson recruits Flight Sergeant George Deering, Pilot Officer Frederick Spafford, Warrant Officer John Pulford. By early April, 617 Squadron exists on paper and in reality. 19 crews, 133 men in total, the best that Bomber Command can provide. They arrive at Scampton from various stations across Britain, most of them mystified by their sudden transfers. The ground crews arrive two-fitters, riggers, armourers, all sworn to secrecy about the strange cylindrical weapons being installed in the modified Lancasters. The training begins immediately, and it's unlike anything the crews have experienced. April 12, 1943. 200 feet above the Derwent Reservoir, Derbyshire. Gibson's Lancaster screams over the water so low that the propeller wash kicks up spray behind them. In the right-hand seat, Flight Sergeant John Pulford, the flight engineer, calls out heights from the altimeter, 100 feet, 80, 60. Lower, Gibson commands, pushing the control column forward. 50 feet, 40. Hold it there. The Lancaster steadies at 40 feet above the water, close enough that Gibson can see individual ripples on the surface. The 4 Merlin engines howl at full power, eating fuel at a terrifying rate. The Derwent Reservoir stretches ahead, its surface gleaming in the weak April sunlight. This is the training ground, chosen because its dimensions roughly approximate the German reservoirs they'll be attacking. In the nose, Flight Lieutenant Spam Spafford, the bomb aimer, is struggling with a problem that threatens the entire operation. He needs to judge the exact distance to the dam for 25 yards at night, over water, at 220 miles per hour. But how? There's no radar that can measure such precise distances at low altitude. The Mark 14 bomb sight is useless at this height. Everything happens too fast for visual estimation. Wallis has proposed a solution, though Gibson thinks it sounds like something from a schoolboy's science project. 2 spotlights, one mounted under the nose, one under the fuselage tail angled so their beams converge on the water at exactly 60 feet altitude. When the 2 circles of light merge into a figure-8 shape, the aircraft is at the correct height. For distance, they'll use a simple wooden triangular sight mounted in the bomb aimer's position, with 2 nails positioned so that when the towers on either side of the dam line up with the nails, they're at exactly 425 yards. It's crude. It's imprecise. It's the best they have. Bomb doors open, Gibson says, simulating the attack run. The Lancaster's nose drops slightly as air resistance increases. Pulford compensates with the elevator trim. They're practicing the exact conditions they'll face over German low altitude, high speed, level flight, while every instinct screams at Gibson to climb, to turn, to get away from the water that's close enough to kill them if he makes the smallest mistake. Spotlight check, Spafford calls. Pulford flicks the switch. Below, 2 spots of light appear on the water's surface. They're too far apart, their aircraft is too high. Down 10, Spafford says. Gibson eases the Lancaster lower. The spots converge, forming the crucial figure 8. Height good, Spafford confirms. They roar over a stone viaduct that's standing in for the dam wall. Spafford calls, release point, now. Gibson doesn't release anything. They're not carrying the actual weapon yet, won't be until just before the operation. But he notes the speed, the altitude, the sight picture. They'll do this run 50 more times today. 60 times tomorrow. They'll practice until every member of the crew can fly this profile in their sleep. But there's a problem, and it reveals itself over the following days. At night, the spotlights work perfectly for judging height. But the wooden bomb sight for distance is almost useless in darkness. The dam towers are barely visible against the valley walls. Several practice runs result in releases that would have been 50 to 100 yards off target, close enough to destroy the weapon, not close enough to destroy the dam. Wallis returns to his workshop and emerges 2 days later with a modification, a simple range-finding sight that uses the principle of parallax, similar to the rangefinders on naval ships. It's ingenious, like everything Wallis creates, but it requires practice. Endless, grinding practice. May 1st, 1943. RAF Manston, Kent. The crews are exhausted. For 3 weeks, they've flown practice runs over reservoirs, lakes, and coastal waters. They've mastered low-level navigation using landmarks and timing. They've learned to fly in moonlight, in overcast conditions, in the half-light of dusk. They've practiced formation flying at treetop height, practiced bombing runs until the sequence is burned into muscle memory. But they still don't know the target. Today, however, is different. Today they're at RAF Manston in Kent, and sitting on the tarmac are 3 Lancasters with actual Upkeep weapons mounted in their bellies. Gibson's crew will fly the first live drop. Barnes Wallis is here, nervous as a father watching his child's first steps. So are representatives from the Air Ministry, from the Ministry of Aircraft Production, from Bomber Command. Everyone understands that if this test fails, Operation Chastise will be cancelled. 3 weeks of training, months of Wallis's work, thousands of pounds of investment all riding on the next 30 minutes. Gibson's Lancaster takes off and heads toward the bombing range at Reculver on the Kent coast. In the nose, Spafford lies prone, watching the spotlights dance on the water below. The hydraulic motor whines as it spins the Upkeep cylinder to 500 RPM. The bomb bay empty of doors gapes open, the massive cylinder rotating between its caliper arms. 1 minute, Spafford calls. Gibson steadies the aircraft at 60 feet, watching the spotlight circles merge. The coast rushes toward them at 220 miles per hour. The practice target a wooden structure meant to simulate the dam rises ahead. 30 seconds. Gibson's hands are steady on the control column, his feet light on the rudder pedals. Beside him, Pulford monitors the engine instruments, ready to compensate for the sudden change in aircraft weight when the 9,250-pound bomb releases. 15 seconds. 10. Range good. The wooden dam fills their vision. Every window in the Lancaster vibrates with engine noise. Gibson can feel the shudder of the spinning cylinder through the airframe. Release. Spafford shouts, hitting the button. The caliper arms snap open. The Upkeep drops, still spinning backward at 500 RPM. For a heartbeat, it seems to hang in the air, then strikes the water with a tremendous splash. The backspin grips the surface. The cylinder bounds forward, once, twice, 3 times, each bounce covering roughly 70 yards. It strikes the wooden target structure, splashes down beside it, and sinks. 30 feet beneath the surface, the hydrostatic fuse triggers. The explosion sends up a column of water that drenches the observers on shore. When the spray clears, the target structure is gone, reduced to splinters. The watching officers burst into spontaneous applause. On the beach, Barnes Wallis removes his glasses and wipes his eyes, whether from spray or tears, no one can tell. It works. Against all odds, against all skepticism, the bouncing bomb works. May 15, 1943. RAF Scampton. Briefing room. Finally, the crews learn their target. Gibson stands before a large map of Western Germany, pointing to 3 dams marked with red circles. Behind him, reconnaissance photographs show every detail of the targets, the defensive positions, the torpedo nets, the approach valleys. Gentlemen, Gibson says, tomorrow night, we're going to destroy these dams. The room erupts in murmurs. Some crews have guessed the practice runs over reservoirs made it obvious. Others are stunned. The Möhne Dam. The Eder Dam. The Sorp. Names that have been whispered in Bomber Command for years as impossible targets. Gibson outlines the plan. 3 waves of aircraft, designated by code words. The first Wave 9 Lancasters, including his own, will attack the Möhne Dam. If any bombs remain after the Möhne is breached, they'll proceed to the Eder. The second wave, 5 aircraft, will hit the Sorp Dam using a different technique, flying along the dam's axis and releasing without bouncing. The third wave, 5 aircraft in reserve, will be called in by radio to strike whichever targets remain. Navigation, Gibson continues, will be critical. We'll fly at low level the entire way below German radar coverage. Route finding depends on split-second timing and visual landmarks. Miss one turning point, and you'll be over the wrong valley with no time to reposition. He outlines the routes, traced in red on the map. The northern route crosses the North Sea, enters Holland near the Scheldt estuary, navigates through a maze of waterways and canals, crosses into Germany, and approaches the Ruhr Valley from the northeast. Every mile is planned, every landmark identified. The moon, Gibson says, will be nearly full tomorrow night. That's why we're going. Then we need the visibility. But it also means the Germans will see us. Expect fighters. Expect flak at every defended position we pass. He pauses, letting that sink in. Then, once we reach the Möhne, we'll attack individually at 1-minute intervals. Each aircraft makes its run while the others orbit and provide covering fire if possible. You'll know when the dam breaches, trust me, you'll know. Then we reform and proceed to the Eder if necessary. Barnes Wallis steps forward, looking pale and worn. He's barely slept in weeks, tormented by the knowledge that any miscalculation on his part will kill these men. He explains the weapon one final time, the physics, the requirements, the precise parameters that must be met. I know it seems impossible, Wallis concludes quietly. I know the margins are razor thin. But you've proven in training that you can do this. The mathematics are sound. If you hold your height, maintain your speed, release at the correct distance, the bomb will perform as designed. Flight Lieutenant Hopgood raises his hand. Mr. Wallis, what happens if we miss? Can we come around for a second run? Wallis and Gibson exchange glances. You can try, Gibson says carefully. But once the first bombs go off, the whole valley will be awake. Every gun will be firing. The longer you're over the target, the greater your chances of being shot down. If at all possible, get it right on the first pass. The briefing continues for another hour. Radio procedures, recognition signals, emergency protocols. When it ends, the crews file out quietly, the weight of tomorrow's mission settling on their shoulders. That night, many write letters home, knowing they might not return. Others sleep, exhausted from weeks of training. A few gather in the officers' mess, drinking beer and playing cards with forced cheerfulness. Gibson walks the perimeter of the airfield alone, smoking cigarette after cigarette, mentally rehearsing every phase of the operation. 19 Lancasters. 133 men. One desperate gamble to strike a blow that might shorten the war by months. Tomorrow night, they'll either make history or die trying. Quite possibly both. May 16, 1943. 2 p.m. hours. RAF Scampton. The afternoon sun beats down on the concrete dispersal areas where 19 Lancaster bombers stand in irregular rows, their shadows stretching long across the tarmac. Ground crews swarm over each aircraft like ants on a carcass, making final checks, topping off fuel tanks, testing control surfaces. The Upkeep weapons have been loaded, each cylindrical bomb now armed with 6,600 pounds of Torpex explosive, enough to level a city block. Flight Sergeant Ken Brown, a Canadian pilot with 44 operations behind him, stands beside his Lancaster, ED-918, watching his Flight Engineer Chief Powell check the oil levels in the starboard inner Merlin engine. Brown is 23 years old, tall and lanky, with a perpetual squint of someone who spent too many hours staring at instrument panels in darkness. His crew calls him Brownie, and they've been together since training 7 men who've learned to function as a single organism, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. She's as ready as she'll ever be, Powell says, wiping oil from his hands. All 4 engines running sweet. Hydraulics holding pressure. That bloody great drum underneath is strapped in tight. Brown nods, but his eyes keep drifting to the Upkeep weapon visible through the open bomb bay. The thing is monstrous, up close 4 feet in diameter, painted black, the steel surface marked with cryptic stenciling. A small wooden propeller extends from the tail, the hydrostatic fuse that will trigger detonation at precisely 30 feet depth. If everything goes according to plan. If the bomb bounces correctly. If they survive long enough to release it. There are too many IFS in this operation. Across the dispersal, Flying Officer Les Knight, another Australian, older than most at 22, sits on the grass beneath his aircraft's wing, writing a letter. His navigator, Pilot Officer Hobday, knows better than to interrupt. Knight writes to his wife every day, letters that assume he'll return but acknowledge he might not. Today's letter is shorter than usual. What can you say when you're about to attempt something that breaks every rule of sensible aviation? At 3 p.m. hours, the crews gather for a final meal in the officers' mess. It's an odd affair: roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, all prepared with as much care as rationing allows. The mess stewards have outdone themselves, understanding without being told that this might be the last meal some of these men eat. The crews eat mechanically, making small talk, the tension beneath the surface like static electricity before a storm. Gibson picks at his food, his mind already in the aircraft, flying the route in his imagination. Beside him, his flight engineer Pulford says something about the weather forecast: clear skies over Germany, good moon visibility. Gibson grunts acknowledgement. He's flown through worse weather than this, but tonight, weather isn't the problem. The problem is flying at 60 feet in moonlight while every German gunner in the Ruhr takes aim. 6 p.m. hours. Final briefing. The crews assemble in the briefing room one last time. Group Captain Whitworth reviews the latest intelligence. No significant changes to German defenses, no indication that the enemy suspects anything unusual. The Luftwaffe has night fighters stationed at nearby airfields, but they'll be focused on the main bomber stream heading elsewhere tonight. A diversion raid on Düsseldorf designed to draw attention away from the dam attack. Barnes Wallis stands at the back of the room, watching the young men who'll carry his creation into battle. He looks haggard, older than his 56 years. Over the past weeks, he's come to know some of these crews personally, has answered their technical questions, explained the weapons' peculiarities. Now he must watch them fly into the darkness, knowing that his calculations, his mathematics will determine whether they live or die. Gibson runs through the routes one final time, using a pointer on the large map. First wave, my section will cross the coast here, at Scheldt. Navigate east through Holland using the canals and waterways. They're visible in moonlight, easy to follow. Cross into Germany here, then turn south toward the Möhne. Estimated flight time, 1 hour 40 minutes. Once we reach the dam, we'll orbit here, at this point, and attack individually in order. He traces the route for the second Wave 5 aircraft under Flight Lieutenant McCarthy, taking a slightly different path to the Sorp Dam. Then the third wave, the reserves, who'll wait for radio orders before proceeding to secondary targets. Wireless silence, Gibson emphasizes, until we reach the target. Then I'll transmit bombing results using the code words. Goner for the Upkeep released and exploded in contact with the dam. Nigger for a successful breach. The code word makes several men wince. It's the name of Gibson's black Labrador retriever, killed by a car just hours before the briefing. Gibson had been fond of the dog, and in a characteristically dark humor typical of RAF crews, the name became the code word for success. War leaves no room for sentiment. Final weather check, the meteorological officer announces. High pressure over northern Europe. Clear skies. Wind from the northwest at 5 knots. Temperature at altitude, 9 degrees Celsius. Moon rises at 9 p.m. hours, nearly full. Visibility excellent. Perfect flying weather, which means perfect shooting weather for the German defenders. At 7 p.m. hours, the briefing ends. The crews disperse to their quarters to don flying gear. Heavy sheepskin jackets, flying boots, May Westlife preservers. Some carry Lucky Charms photographs, coins, letters. Sergeant Ray Grayston, rear gunner in Flight Lieutenant Shannon's crew, has a small stuffed toy his daughter gave him. He tucks it into his flying suit, beside his heart. 8 p.m. hours. The waiting. The crews stand beside their aircraft as the sun sinks toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The Lancasters are fully fueled, armed, ready. Ground crews have completed final checks and retreated to a respectful distance, knowing that from this point, the aircraft belong to their crews. Gibson walks the line of bombers, stopping at each one to exchange words with the pilots. At ED 932, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Hopgood, Gibson's friend, his most trusted wingman, he pauses longer. Hopgood grins, cocky despite the tension. See you over the target, sir. Keep it low and keep it fast, Hoppy. Always do. But Gibson knows Hopgood's Lancaster will be second to attack the Möhne, right behind Gibson's own aircraft, which means Hopgood will fly straight into a fully alerted defense, every German gun tracking his approach. The first aircraft often escapes the worst fire element of surprise, buys precious seconds. The second aircraft gets the full fury of aroused defenders. At 9 p.m. hours, as the moon rises fat and yellow over Lincolnshire, Wing Commander Gibson climbs into Lancaster ED 932G, designated G for George. His crew is already aboard. Pilot Officer Torga Tyrum, a Canadian, at the navigator station. Pilot Officer Frederick Spam, Spafford lying prone in the nose at the bomb aimer's position. Flight Sergeant John Pulford in the flight engineer's seat. Flight Lieutenant Robert Hutchison in the wireless operator station. Flight Sergeant George Deering in the front gun turret. Flight Sergeant Trevor Roper in the rear turret. 7 men. 4 Merlin engines. 1 bouncing bomb. One impossible mission. Gibson settles into the left-hand seat, the pilot's throne from which is commanded aircraft through 3 tours of operations. His hands move through the pre-flight checks, automatic fuel selectors, mixture controls, propeller pitch, flaps, trim tabs. Beside him, Pulford mirrors the checklist, calling out each item. Pitot heater. On. Magnetos. Both. Oil pressure. Normal. Outside, the ground crew chief raises a hand, waiting for the signal. Gibson glances at his watch. 21:10 hours. Time to go. He holds up 2 fingers. The ground crew scrambles to pull the wheel chocks. Gibson primes the engines, then hits the starter for the port outer Merlin. The propeller jerks, turns, catches. The engine coughs once, twice, then roars to life with a bellow that echoes across the airfield. One by one, Gibson starts the remaining 3 engines until all 4 are thundering at idle, the Lancaster trembling like a racehorse at the gate. Around him, 18 other Lancasters are starting engines, a symphony of power that shakes windows in the station buildings. The noise is tremendous, a physical force that rattles teeth and drowns conversation. 21:28 hours. Takeoff. Gibson releases the brakes and G. George lurches forward, taxiing toward the active runway. Behind him, the other 8 aircraft of the first wave follow in sequence: Hopgood in M. Mother, Flight Lieutenant Martin in P. Popsy, Squadron Leader Young in A. Apple, Flight Lieutenant Maltby in J. Johnny, Flight Lieutenant Maudsley in Z. Zebra, Pilot Officer Knight in N. Nuts, Flight Lieutenant Shannon in L. Leather, and Pilot Officer Munro in W. Willie. 9 Lancasters. 9 chances to breach the Möhne Dam. At the runway threshold, Gibson performs final checks. Control surfaces full and free, flaps set for takeoff, throttles responsive. The Lancaster is heavy 68,000 pounds with full fuel and the Upkeep weapon. Heavier than any load Gibson has ever carried. The runway ahead looks impossibly short. The control tower flashes a green Aldi's lamp. Clear for takeoff. Gibson pushes the throttles forward. The 4 Merlins surge to full power, producing 5,200 horsepower. The Lancaster accelerates slowly at first, gathering momentum, the tail wheel lifting as speed increases. 60 miles per hour. 70. 80. The end of the runway approaches. 90 miles per hour. Gibson eases back on the control column. The main wheels leave the ground. G. George is airborne, climbing sluggishly into the darkening sky. Pulford retracts the landing gear, and Gibson banks gently to the east, beginning the long journey to Germany. Behind him, at 1-minute intervals, the other aircraft take off. By 21:45 hours, all 9 Lancasters of the first wave are airborne, forming a loose gaggle as they climb to 1,500 feet and set course for the North Sea. The second wave, McCarthy's 5 aircraft bound for the Sorp, departs next. Then the third wave, the reserves. By 10 p.m. hours, 19 Lancasters are in the air, carrying 133 men toward the most heavily defended industrial region in Nazi Germany. 22:45 hours. Over the North Sea. Gibson flies with the cockpit side window open, his eyes scanning the horizon. The moon hangs above, bright enough to read by, illuminating the water below in shades of silver and black. The North Sea stretches endlessly in all directions, empty of ships, empty of landmarks, just water and sky and the drone of Merlin engines. In the navigator's compartment behind and below the cockpit, Torge Tyrum hunches over his charts, calculating drift and ground speed. Navigation tonight is purely visual, and by dead reckoning the radio compass is useless at low altitude, and they're maintaining wireless silence. Every few minutes, Tyrum passes course corrections to Gibson via the intercom. Steer 095 magnetic. The wireless operator, Hutchison, monitors his radios in silence, listening for any German transmissions that might indicate the defenses are alerted. So far, nothing. The night is quiet except for the engines. At 23:15 hours, the Dutch coast appears ahead, a dark line against the lighter water. Gibson pushes the control column forward, descending. 1,000 feet. 500. 200. 100. Leveling at 60 feet, he announces. The Lancaster drops to wave-top height, skimming across the water at 200 miles per hour. This is the dangerous part. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and they'll plow into the sea. But this altitude keeps them below German radar, invisible to the detection stations that line the coast. They cross the beach at the Scheldt estuary, and suddenly Holland spreads below them a patchwork of fields and canals, dikes and windmills, all painted in moonlight. Gibson follows the Wilhelmina Canal, a dark ribbon of water that cuts eastward through the landscape. The landmarks appear exactly as they did in the reconnaissance photographs. The bridge at Roosendaal, the town of Tilburg with its church spires, the waterway junction at Eindhoven. In the rear turret, Trevor Roper rotates his guns, watching for night fighters. The rear gunner is the aircraft's guardian, the man who must spot enemy fighters before they can attack. It's a lonely position, isolated in the tail of the aircraft, separated from the rest of the crew by the length of the fuselage. Navigator to pilot, next turning point in 4 minutes. Gibson acknowledges. They're flying at 240 miles per hour now, faster than the planned 220, but Gibson wants speed in reserve. 4 miles per minute. Every landmark must appear exactly on time, or they'll be lost over hostile territory with no way to reorient. A town appears ahead, lights showing despite the blackout, probably a German garrison that feels safe this far from England. Gibson banks around it, giving it a wide berth. No need to attract attention. Not yet. They cross into Germany at 23:50 hours, the border invisible from the air but marked on Terham's chart. The landscape changes subtly, fewer waterways, more forests, occasional small towns dark beneath the moonlight. This is the enemy heartland, the industrial Ruhr, where every field might hide an anti-aircraft battery, every hilltop a radar station. Front gunner to pilot, I see tracer ahead. 3 o'clock low. Gibson looks. In the distance, strings of red and white light arc upward, flak, probably firing at another aircraft from their formation. One of the Lancasters has drawn attention. All crew, stay alert. We're approaching defended territory. The Rhine appears ahead, a broad silver ribbon. They've been flying for nearly an hour and a half, covering 250 miles at treetop height. The crew is tense now, adrenaline replacing fatigue. Gibson's hands are steady on the controls, but his jaw is clenched tight enough to hurt. 10 minutes to target. Gibson begins the descent to attack altitude, dropping to 150 feet as they enter the hills and valleys approaching the Möhne Reservoir. The landscape rises around them, forested slopes, dark shadows, the occasional farm building. The moonlight helps, but it also exposes them. Anyone on the ground can see the Lancaster clearly, can hear the distinctive rumble of 4 Merlins echoing off the hillsides. Engineer to pilot, fuel state. Pulford checks the gauges. 2,000 pounds remaining. Sufficient for attack and return. 2,000 pounds. Not much margin for error. If they have to divert, if they get lost on the return journey, they'll be swimming the North Sea. Navigator to pilot. Möhne Reservoir ahead. 3 minutes. Gibson's heart rate increases despite himself. 3 minutes. After months of planning, weeks of training, hours of flying, they're 3 minutes from the target. He keys the intercom, all crew, prepare for attack. Bomb aimer, arm the weapon. In the nose, Spafford flip switches. The Upkeep's electrical circuits activate. The weapon is live now, 6,600 pounds of Torpex waiting to explode. One hit from flak, one mistake, and G. George will vanish in a fireball. The valley narrows. Dark water appears ahead, glinting in the moonlight. The Möhne Reservoir, 140 million cubic meters of water held back by the dam that's about to receive visitors from England. Gibson can see it now, even from this distance. The massive curved wall of the Möhne Dam stretching across the valley, its twin towers dark against the water. Bomb aimer to pilot, I have the target visual. Gibson's mouth is dry. His hands are welded to the control column. Beside him, Pulford watches the engine instruments, ready for anything. This is it. No turning back now. Beginning attack run, Gibson transmits, breaking wireless silence for the first time. Behind him, somewhere in the darkness, 8 other Lancasters orbit, waiting their turn. Gibson lines up on the approach path, descending to 60 feet above the reservoir surface. The spotlights snap on, 2 cones of light stabbing downward. The circles are too far apart, still too high. Lower. The water rushes beneath them, close enough to touch. The circles converge, forming the figure 8 that means they're at exactly 60 feet. The Lancaster's propellers are just feet above the surface, the slipstream creating a wake in the water below. And then the Germans open fire. Tracers arc toward them from both towers of the dam, streams of 20mm cannon fire, red and white dots that seem to move slowly at first, then accelerate as they approach. The Germans have been waiting, perhaps alerted by the sound of Merlin engines echoing through the valley. Gibson holds the Lancaster steady, fighting every instinct that screams at him to break away, to climb, to evade. "Steady," Spafford calls from the nose, his voice preternaturally calm despite the flak bursting around them. "Left, left, steady." The dam towers fill their vision, massive stone structures with guns blazing from every aperture. A tracer stream walks across the water toward them, then passes overhead with a sound like tearing canvas. In the front turret, Deering returns fire, his twin Brownings hammering away, trying to suppress the German gunners. The hydraulic motor whines as the Upkeep spins to 500 RPM. The entire aircraft vibrates with the rotating cylinder's momentum. Distance good, steady, steady. Gibson can see individual windows in the dam towers now, can see the muzzle flashes from the German guns. The Lancaster is at 60 feet, exactly 220 miles per hour, 425 yards from the wall. Every parameter perfect. Spafford's finger hovers over the release button. Bomb gone. The caliper arms snap open. 9,000 pounds of spinning steel drops away. The Lancaster leaps upward, suddenly lighter, and Gibson hauls back on the control column, climbing over the dam wall with feet to spare. Behind them, the Upkeep strikes the water with a tremendous splash, bounces once, twice, 3 times, then slams into the dam face and sinks. Gibson banks hard left, climbing to 1,000 feet, positioning G. George to watch the result. Pulford counts down, 30 seconds to detonation, 20, 10. The explosion is visible even from this distance, a white dome of water erupting from the reservoir, climbing hundreds of feet into the air, the shockwave radiating outward in concentric rings. The dam towers disappear momentarily in the spray. When the water column collapses back into the reservoir, Gibson can see nothing. The dam wall stands intact, apparently undamaged. "No breach," he reports tersely over the radio. "Hoppy, you're next." Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood's M-Mother is already making its approach run, spotlights on, descending to attack altitude. Gibson watches helplessly as the Germans concentrate their fire on the second Lancaster. They're fully alert now, every gun manned and tracking. Tracer fire converges on M-Mother like spotlights in reverse streams of light reaching up from the darkness to claw at the bomber. Hopgood holds steady. His bomb aimer, pilot officer John Fraser, calls corrections. They're at 60 feet, maintaining 220 miles per hour despite the flak that's punching holes through their wings and fuselage. One of the port engines trails smoke, hit by a 20mm shell. Bomb gone. The Upkeep drops, bounces across the water. But M-Mother is mortally wounded. As Hopgood pulls up over the dam, the port inner engine explodes in flames. The Lancaster lurches, loses height, clips the power station building on the far side of the dam with its wing. The aircraft disintegrates in mid-air, sections tumbling through darkness trailing fire. 2 parachutes blossom white in the moonlight, only 2 from a crew of 7. The burning wreckage impacts in a field beyond the dam, lighting the valley with orange flame. Gibson's hands tighten on the control column. Hoppy, his friend since training days. Gone in seconds. But there's no time for grief. M-Mother's Upkeep has detonated against the dam, sending up another massive water column. When it subsides, Gibson can see a crack in the dam face, a dark line running vertically from near the base. Damage, but not a breach. "Peepopsy, you're in," Gibson transmits, keeping his voice level. Flight Lieutenant Harold Mickey Martin brings his Lancaster in low, even lower than Gibson dared, barely 50 feet above the water. The German gunners concentrate their fire, but Martin's rear gunner, Flight Sergeant Tammy Simpson, and front gunner, Pilot Officer Bob Hay, are already shooting back, their tracers seeking out the German gun positions. Martin releases at perfect range. The Upkeep bounces true, strikes the dam, sinks and explodes. Another colossal eruption of water. Another vertical crack appears, parallel to the first. The dam is weakening. Gibson can sense it even from 1,000 feet up, orbiting in the darkness while his friends fly into hell. Squadron leader Melvin Dingy Young attacks next in Apple, his bomb aimer Flight Lieutenant Vincent McCausland calling the final corrections over the intercom while flak bursts all around them. The Upkeep releases, bounces, strikes true. The fourth explosion sends water cascading over the dam's crest. And then Gibson sees it. A section of the dam wall, perhaps 100 feet wide, simply isn't there anymore. Where solid masonry stood moments before, there's now empty space. Water begins pouring through, not a trickle but a torrent, a roaring cataract that even at this distance sounds like approaching thunder. Nigger! Gibson shouts into his radio, using the code word for successful breach. Nigger! Nigger! The breach widens as they watch, thousands of tons of water pressure tearing at the damaged masonry, widening the gap with each passing second. Entire sections of the dam face collapse and tumble into the boiling maelstrom below. The power station buildings at the dam's base vanish beneath a wall of water. The reservoir is draining. 140 million cubic meters of water, enough to fill 56,000 Olympic swimming pools, is cascading into the Ruhr Valley, gathering speed, gathering mass, becoming a tsunami that will sweep away everything in its path for 50 miles downstream. Gibson transmits to the remaining aircraft, Möhne is breached. All remaining aircraft, proceed to Eder Dam. Flight Lieutenant David Shannon in L. Leather, Pilot Officer Les Knight in N. Nuts, and Flight Lieutenant Henry Maudslay in Z. Zebra acknowledge and set course southeast for their secondary target, 40 miles distant. 1:30 hours, May 17th. The Eder Dam. The Eder Dam is, if anything, more difficult than the Möhne. The approach requires flying through a narrow, winding valley, descending to attack altitude while navigating around hills and ridges barely visible in moonlight. There are no helpful straight approaches, no convenient waterways to follow. And while the Eder lacks the heavy flak defenses of the Möhne, the terrain itself is a deadly obstacle. Shannon makes the first attempt, descending into the valley and lining up on the dam. But the approach angle is wrong, too steep, wrong speed. He pulls up and goes around for another try. Then another. After 5 attempts, his navigator Flight Lieutenant Danny Walker tells him their fuel is running critically low. They'll have to choose, attack now, regardless of conditions, or abort and risk not making it home. Shannon commits to a 6th run. This time, everything aligns. The spotlights converge at 60 feet. Speed is good. Range is perfect. Bomb gone. The Upkeep bounces across the reservoir and strikes the dam dead center. The explosion sends up the now familiar column of white water. When it subsides, the dam stands intact. No apparent damage, Shannon reports, his frustration evident even over the crackling radio. Maudslay attacks next in Z Zebra. His approach is too fast, too high. Something is wrong with the aircraft, perhaps battle damage from flak encountered en route. His bomb aimer releases anyway. The Upkeep bounces erratically, strikes the dam parapet rather than the water beside it, and detonates prematurely. The explosion occurs while Z Zebra is directly over the dam. The shockwave and debris strike the Lancaster's underside. Maudslay transmits a brief, garbled message, then nothing. Z Zebra limps away trailing smoke and is never seen again. All 7 crew members are killed when the damaged aircraft crashes 150 miles from the target. Now it's Les Knight's turn in N. Nuts. The young Australian pilot makes a perfect approach, threading the valley at precisely 60 feet, the spotlights forming their figure 8 on the water. His bomb aimer, Flying Officer Edward Johnson, waits until the last possible second, then releases. The Upkeep bounces 3 times and strikes the dam squarely. Knight pulls up and away, climbing desperately to avoid the hills on the far side. The explosion is even larger than those at the Möhne, possibly because the Eder's wall, though taller, is older and slightly less reinforced. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happens. Then a section of the dam begins to crumble. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed, a 70-foot wide breach opens. Water pours through, and within minutes, the breach has widened to over 200 feet. The Eder Dam is broken. 200 million cubic meters of water begin their destructive journey downstream, flooding additional valleys, drowning more factories, destroying more infrastructure. The combined release from both dams, 340 million cubic meters, is one of the largest artificial floods in human history. 3:15 hours. The flight home. Gibson leads the surviving aircraft back across Germany, still flying at low level to avoid radar and night fighters. Behind them, the Ruhr Valley is chaos, sirens wailing, emergency vehicles rushing toward the disaster zones, whole communities being evacuated ahead of the advancing floodwaters. The Möhne's breach has unleashed destruction on an almost biblical scale. The town of Neheim, 3 miles downstream, has been completely inundated, its streets transformed into raging rivers. The synthetic rubber plant at Hulst, one of Germany's most important chemical facilities, is underwater. Railway bridges have been swept away. Roads have vanished. The hydroelectric power stations that fed the Ruhr's factories are silent, their turbines destroyed or submerged. But the cost has been high. Of the 19 Lancasters that took off from Scampton, 8 will not return. 53 crewmen are dead. 3 are prisoners of war. The losses represent over 40% of the attacking Force A casualty rate that would be unsustainable in a sustained campaign. As Gibson crosses the Dutch coast at 4 o'clock hours, dawn is beginning to break in the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, in loose formation, the surviving Lancasters follow: Young in A Apple, Martin in P Popsy, Maltby in J Johnny, Shannon in L Leather, Knight in N Nuts. Others from the second and third waves are scattered across the sky, navigating independently toward home. The North Sea spreads below, calm and empty in the early morning light. Gibson allows himself, for the first time in 6 hours, to relax slightly. They've done it. Against all odds, against all expectations, Barnes Wallis's impossible weapon has worked. 2 dams destroyed. The Ruhr Valley flooded. Nazi Germany's industrial heartland dealt a blow that will take months to recover from. But the faces of the dead haunt him. Hopgood, whose aircraft exploded over the Möhne. Maudslay, who vanished after his bomb detonated prematurely. And the others' crews from the second wave who encountered unexpected flak positions, who flew into power lines in the darkness, who made tiny navigation errors that ended in catastrophe. At 5:15 hours, G. George touches down at Scampton. Gibson taxis to the dispersal area and shuts down the engines. The sudden silence is shocking after 6 hours of Merlin thunder. His hands are shaking now, the adrenaline finally wearing off. Ground crews swarm the aircraft, checking for damage. Barnes Wallis is there, waiting on the tarmac, his face creased with worry. When Gibson climbs down from the cockpit, Wallis grabs his arm. "The dams." "Both gone," Gibson says quietly. "Möhne and Eder. Breached clean through." Wallis's knees seem to buckle. He leans against the Lancaster's fuselage, tears streaming down his face. And the cost? Gibson's jaw tightens. 8 aircraft. 53 men. The engineer's triumph turns to ash. 53 lives. 53 men who will never see another sunrise, who died testing his theories, who flew his weapon into the guns of the enemy and paid the ultimate price. The mathematics had been perfect. The physics had been sound. But mathematics cannot account for human cost. Over the following days, reconnaissance photographs confirm the devastation. The Möhne's breach is 250 feet wide. The Eder's is slightly smaller but equally catastrophic. 11 factories have been destroyed by flooding, 25 bridges washed away, 11 power plants damaged or destroyed. Over 1,600 people are dead tragically, mostly slave laborers and prisoners of war housed in camps downstream. The German war machine has suffered a significant setback. But the dams will be repaired. By September 1943, both are operational again, rebuilt by thousands of forced laborers working around the clock. The strategic impact, while real, is less decisive than hoped. Germany's industrial production, already dispersed and redundant, absorbs the blow and continues. The real victory is psychological. The Dambusters' raid proves that no target is invulnerable, that British ingenuity and courage can strike the Reich's heartland with precision and devastating effect. It becomes one of the most famous operations of the war, celebrated in newspapers, commemorated in films, studied by military strategists for decades to come. Wing Commander Guy Gibson receives the Victoria Cross. 33 other decorations are awarded to the surviving crews. 617 Squadron becomes legendary, going on to fly some of the war's most dangerous precision raids, including the sinking of the battleship Tirpitz. Barnes Wallis returns to his workshops, haunted by the dead but driven to create more weapons, more innovations that might shorten the war and bring the boys home. His earthquake bombs the Tallboy and Grand Slam will later destroy viaducts, U-boat pens, and bunkers that conventional bombs cannot touch. And in the Ruhr Valley, the floodwaters eventually recede, leaving behind mud, wreckage, and the shattered remnants of 2 dams that were supposed to be unbreakable. They were wrong. One British engineer with an idea, 19 Lancaster bombers, and 133 men willing to fly into hell had proven them wrong.